Good afternoon or good morning. I'm coming to you from Mountain Standard Time, but for those of you on the East where we normally are, happy Wednesday, January 15th, 2025. I'm Drew Clark, CEO and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. Happy to welcome you to the second of our programs this year. We're going to be talking about TikTok today. Is TikTok toast? Is the title of our discussion. And we want to kind of explore what's happening on the ground as we speak, right? This is a topic of extreme interest and potential dramatic changes in the next 5 days, 6 days. So we hope our timing is right. But we want to just thank you all for being here, remind you that Broadband Breakfast is a news and events community focused on better broadband, better lives. We report on and bring this community together, high capacity internet, making sure we get high capacity internet everywhere in the country and I suppose beyond. We mostly focused on the United States, but we also care about the way broadband is used and how it becomes, part of our lives, how it's used effectively, how we guard against things that maybe aren't good or effective or we don't want in our lives. And I suppose social media used to be thought of as a great and easy way to be involved in communities across geographies and countries globally. And the last 5, 6, 7 years, there's been much more focus on some of the challenges, some of the dangers and the problems of social media. And certainly that conversation has intersected with the discussion around TikTok, which we'll talk about just now. But this is just by way of saying, why we care about this topic at Broadband Breakfast is because we want to engage with the infrastructure, but also the applications, the edge devices and issues and controversies. And we have an excellent panel to consider this topic about TikTok's past, future, and what we can expect in the coming days. But before I do that, I also want to let everyone know that we are here every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time. We talk about some aspect, and our topic next week is going to be the state of the CHIPS Act. Got a great panel. We'll be rolling out announcements for our upcoming panels in weeks to come. But you can expect a number of great and exciting topics. And I also do want to thank the sponsors of Broadband Breakfast. We do this free program on Broadband Breakfast, the Broadband Breakfast Live Online every Wednesday at 12 noon. We also have premium products. We obviously want everyone to be able to read some aspect of the news on Broadband Breakfast. And there is, by free sign up, you can get 5 articles a month. But if you want unlimited access, we encourage you to join the Broadband Breakfast Club for $99 a month or $590 a year, or actually $490 if you're part of this community. You can get that discount. And we want you to, bring you into those benefits. But we do, appreciate the support of the sponsors that allow us to be able to do this programming. Our sponsors include Utopia Fiber, Comcast, Ookla, Wesco, Coos Systems, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance's Community Broadband Networks Initiative, the California Emerging Technology Fund, G-Fiber, Broadband Now, CostQuest, ACA Connects, NCTA, the Internet and Television Association, Gaia, NextNav, and Nokia. We're happy to welcome Nokia back as a sponsor of Broadband Breakfast. With that, let's go ahead and introduce our guests. Our panelists. We are very excited to have people who know a lot about this topic and are certainly even involved in the controversy in real time. We were joking just beforehand, we need to check our phones because the Supreme Court may issue something, but they've already acted for today. So it's unlikely they're going to act today, but tomorrow. There's always tomorrow. And so with that, let's go ahead and introduce the guests in order they'll be speaking. We're going to hear first from Anton or Tony Dabura. He's PhD Executive Director of the Johns Hopkins University Information Security Institute. in that role. He's a member of the Department of Computer Science and has been a professor there since 2012. And he holds also an appointment with the Malone Center for Engineering and Healthcare, as well as having, incredible resume of experience at AT&T Bell Labs and the research director for the Motorola Cambridge Research Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Thanks so much for being here. I think it's your first time, Tony. We're glad to have you, glad to hear your perspective on this topic. Tony will be followed by Karim Farhat, who is a tech policy expert and particularly works at the Internet Governance Project. And the Internet Governance Project is it affiliated with Georgia Tech? Is that right? Yeah. So it's obviously and there he oversees a team of researchers who working to preserve an open and competitive digital landscape, free trade. Boy, that's a word you don't hear much these days. Free trade in information services and human expression. So look forward to obviously to your perspective on this matter, which clearly has a lot of freedom of expression issues associated with it, as well as other issues too. Following Karim, we're going to hear from Nora Benavidez. She works at the intersection of law, technology, and democracy, and is the senior counsel and director of digital justice and civil rights for Free Press. You've been with us before on this program. Nora, I know we've tried to get you at other times, but we're glad we could get you back for this one, because I really want to hear, kind of the slings and arrows that Free Press has been dealing with on this topic and many other topics, right? I mean, it's, again, I'm not saying we're entering. We've been in a political division, extreme political division in the United States. And so, we're going from one to another about right now. And these are questions that come up. So just another word or two about Free Press and Nora's role there as the senior counsel on the director of the Digital Rights and Digital Justice and Civil Rights Project. She's working to represent the views of the national nonprofit organization Free Press, has appeared before Congress, the Federal Trade Commission, the Canadian House of Commons, and other regulatory bodies. And she's also the author of research reports, including Big Tech Backslide, as well as Empty Promises, analyzing social media platforms' policies and how they play in the elections. So obviously of great interest. And last but not least, Adam Kovacevic. Thank you, Adam, for being with us. I can't remember if you've been with us before, but we've known each other for years. Really excited to hear about what the Chamber of Progress, the organization you are the founder and CEO of, which describes itself as a center-left tech industry policy group, coalition promoting technology's progressive future. You're a veteran Democratic tech industry insider. I said insider, leader is what you wrote, but you're kind of an insider too. Anyway, Adam, thank you so much for being with us. He was named a tech titan by Washingtonian Magazine and an antitrust super influencer by Barron Public Affairs. So again, we're going to go in the order. Tony, Karim, Nora, and Adam, let's turn it over to you for 5 minutes of your thoughts on the topic. Tony.
Great. Thank you, Drew. And thanks for inviting me. Thanks to Broadband Breakfast. I'm going to be talking mainly about the security issues aspect of the proposed TikTok ban, but I will touch on some of the other issues because they have been somewhat conflated. And in addition to national security, we also have the topic of the control of information that the Chinese government has over the TikTok feed, suppressing negative messaging about China, magnifying negative imaging about the U.S. and the economy and so forth. Free speech, of course, I'm sure we'll be talking about. And then also sometimes people talk about just the influence over youth, the amount of time that people and young people spend on TikTok. So all of these things have been mixed together. I'll talk about security. Um, Primarily, at the heart of the issue is that the Chinese government exerts influence, like for all companies. ByteDance is no exception. The Chinese government exerts influence, if not outright control, over ByteDance, and that's just the way the Chinese government operates. TikTok collects a lot of data about Americans and others, including and especially geolocation data, web browser history, and other personal data. And this is the nature of what the Chinese government does. They like to connect the breadcrumbs together in order to gain an advantage and for spying purposes, essentially. And the difficulty that we face in the United States is that a lot of the counterintelligence about what the Chinese government is doing is classified. It's behind closed doors. We have received, we've heard hints from former FBI Director Christopher Wray. We've seen, I remember watching members of Congress emerging from a closed door meeting where they were briefed by members of the intelligence community about what the Chinese government is doing with the data they're getting from TikTok. And their faces literally were ashen. They were shocked. They said, "Oh my God, we have to do something about this. This is terrible." That's no surprise for me as someone working in the security community. We've seen this time and time again from the Chinese government. There was a major agreement signed during the Obama administration, as an example, where the Chinese government agreed to stop doing this kind of spying on the U.S. I believe that lasted about 3 weeks before they were caught at it again. In 2019, they were caught. They were behind a major breach of Marriott hotels, and the purpose there was to find out who was staying. It was the reservation system. Who's staying at the hotel at the same time? Is it a Chinese dissident or some other person or a Chinese government official at the same time that a journalist is there or some other person of interest? Really connecting dots. Also, it's been publicly disclosed, and there was work done in my institute about this. The DJI, the company that makes drones, they used to track geolocation data of where drones are filming video or photos. And if that happens to be in an area of interest near a military facility, sensitive government facility, critical infrastructure, that information was pipelined directly into China. So this is just their MO. They're really good at it. And what Americans don't understand is that one can do a lot with personal location data. Even if you don't work for the government, you don't work at a nuclear power plant, you're not a member of the intelligence community, where you work, you can work at a financial institution, you can associate with people, pharmaceutical industry, the food industry, all of it is valuable information. And it's very difficult to get them to stop that. So, that's the main thing. We'll get back into free speech. As a technologist, I consider TikTok to be yet another platform on the just along the way. I mean, we could have been arguing and gnashing our teeth about MySpace 20 years ago and saying how important MySpace is, but there's always going to be something. TikTok evidently fills an important function, not only for entertainment, but for small businesses and others. And if there's no TikTok, there will be others. If TikTok isn't bought for its value, there will be others. It's not rocket science to create a platform like TikTok. So I'll stop there. I know my time is up, and I know finally I'll just say TikTok isn't the only company that's doing this, and hopefully I'll have an opportunity to talk about the need for broader privacy regulations in the United States. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Tony, for laying that out. All right, let's turn it over to Karim Farhat.
Yes, thank you, Drew, for the invitation and Broadband Breakfast. And what I was going to do was recap how we got here and hopefully try to complement some of the things that Tony said. So, as far as we're concerned at IGP, and we've published a study back in early 2023 about this, there's no there there. This is an open and shut case as far as we're concerned. But let's work our way a little backward. So the arguments haven't really changed much as far as I'm concerned in 5 years since we got here. So the Committee on Foreign Investment in the US, CFIUS for short, they launched an inquiry on ByteDance acquisition of Musical.ly. So that's now TikTok. That was back in 2019. And the concern there was Chinese government access on US user data through the Chinese employee, because China, as you know, has the national intelligence law, the cybersecurity law. These are laws that basically compel or would strongly urge their citizens to comply with the government in assisting for spying purposes. Now, this is just boilerplate language that they put. We have some similar provisions in this country, but let's not get into this. So what happened after was the Trump administration banned TikTok via executive order, and they used the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. But that was later struck down in the courts because of the Berman amendments, specifically the information materials exception, without getting into details there. Then TikTok reached an agreement with the US government, and they started working on Project Texas. That was in 2022. So they spent around $1.5 billion on this massive data localization arrangement. And this involved the intermediation of all their American operations by Oracle. And there was also a new US government controlled corporation called USDS. I believe that's US Data Security. And it was incorporated in July 2022. So all of the board members of USDS were supposed to be approved by the US government and be subjected to data reviews, software audits by Oracle, and all of this big bureaucracy was supposed to be working under the auspices of CFIUS and their supervision. So what happened after is maybe a little like insider baseball. I'm not really sure why, but the government, maybe somebody can fill in the blanks here, but the government walked away from Project Texas, and all of the deals and protocols they were imposing that was gone. So TikTok still decided, they sunk a lot of money into it. They decided to move forward with it as a gesture of good faith. And with that, all US user data was stored by default with Oracle. So that was in the US. And with Project Texas, that was supposed to be it. So the government had a kill switch, had access to all the data, and we were supposed to be done here. But like I say, the government wanted to keep going. And so with the Biden administration, I believe it was Lisa Monaco at the DOJ that sought, or at least pushed for new authorities. And then Congress realized that they needed to avoid using IEEPA powers. So as Tony mentioned, there were two classified briefings that named TikTok a national security threat. And then we're here today. So I think the legislation passed in April 2024. It was through an emergency appropriations bill. Didn't have a lot of debate. It was one of those rushed omnibus provisions, not a lot of substance, but here we are. Then the DC Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the ban in December, and we're still waiting on the Supreme Court's decision any day now. TikTok is seeking an injunction to delay to get some more debate because the Trump administration is literally taking over the next day, and they may have a different interpretation on all of this. So I'll stop here, but I really look forward to getting into like learning some new perspective from the other panelists here.
This is really great to fill in. I mean, like, again, we kind of like, oh yeah, everyone knows that the omnibus in April 2024 banned it, and it was one of those, stealth provisions, right? But the whole kind of backstory there is very useful. Can I just quickly ask if you have insight in this question about the date of April 19th, the date of January 19th. So was that basically just 9 months back? Clearly, January 19th is not a kind of a random day. It's the day before a presidential inauguration. Everyone knew that would be the date. Could you just speak to, like, are you aware of any kind of discussion around the date by which divestment would need to take place, and sort of why that's now kind of back in play?
So I don't have the inside baseball on that, but I suspect it was rushed on purpose. I mean, 6 months, if we look back at the breakup of AT&T, that took 2 years to execute and 10 years to negotiate. Grindr took a year, and that's a much smaller company that was much less complicated to execute. So I think it was designed in a way to be not feasible from the get-go, but to look like for optics purposes that, oh, look, we're giving you some time to divest.
Yeah. All right. We'll get into this in the more robust discussion. Thank you again. Nora, where does Free Press stand on this issue, and what are some additional thoughts on the legal arguments that have been made on this topic?
Thank you so much, Drew. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. It's wonderful to also hear some of these other perspectives. In a short summary, where do we go? We could talk about the national security concerns, the free speech and expression implications, the data privacy issues. There's a lot here. And for those that know less about the what I call sell or be banned law, you never quite know where people will come down on this. I've had so many friends text me saying, "Are you opposed to the ban, or are you in support?" This is an issue so many people actually don't know a lot about. So I'll try to share a little bit that complements Kareem and Tony. First, the ban was supposed to be placed and in effect before the November elections. And that was actually pushed back further to January. And some of that was, I think, due to the implications of cutting off access to information before the November election. But there's really interesting political questions around why January 19th. I'll start with some of what we've been doing. Free Press has largely been concerned about the implications of the ban. And last month, we followed a number of different amicus briefs that we had filed at the lower court level, joining the Knight Institute as well as PEN America, urging the Supreme Court to strike down the TikTok ban. And in that argument, we try to lay out the basis that the ban violates the First Amendment. It restricts Americans' access to ideas, to information, and media from abroad. I think there's also a second wrinkle here, which is, this law fails to address a much larger industry-wide problem of data extraction. The legitimate privacy concerns singling out TikTok really overlooks a broader invasive data collection practice that we see across platforms, across mobile apps, other websites, whether it's using Uber or ordering food for delivery or any other, browsing an online store. All kinds of everyday activities generate personal data about our identities, our preferences, our behaviors. And so to somehow create this national security versus free speech argument and tension ignores the broader systemic problems of the entire industry harvesting our data. In fact, I would say that the Oracle storage of our data in some ways creates additional barriers and checks and balances where TikTok can't actually access in the same ways the data they're collecting versus other platforms based in and owned in the United States. There's another, I would say, on the horizon issue, which, whatever comes of the decision from the Supreme Court, likely coming in the next few days, I think the question before us is, what are the implications of a ban in the United States of an entire platform? It feels like the kind of action that repressive governments take. And with the potential ban comes the secondary question of who would buy TikTok? Who would have the capital to actually buy a platform that is currently priced at anywhere from $100 to $300 billion. I mean, that is an insane amount. That is just the magnitude if you think about the cost of a platform. The variety of prices is really based on whether the algorithm itself is included or not included in the cost. But who would have the opportunity to buy that? When we look at an example like Twitter of a new buyer coming in and changing the platform, I think the ultimate question is, will people who are getting information, content creators who are, using TikTok for their livelihood, will these people have the same kind of access to information, the same access and the sense of integrity and safety that TikTok brings with a new owner? I'm incredibly troubled by the implications here. And I'm happy to get into some of that as we dig in deeper. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah. And nailed it out so clearly about this feels, whether at the end of the day it's the right or the wrong, it feels like something that China would do, right? Rather than something that America would do. And again, that kind of raises the whole question of double standards, and clearly American-based companies cannot operate their platforms in China. Does that, mean we need to, do away with those kinds of standards in the United States? That's question for this discussion, but let me hold off and go to Adam. Adam, bring us home here. Where do you come down on this issue, and what are some of your thoughts about the current state of play of TikTok and the pending ban of it?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that this is really an unprecedented situation where we have such a popular app, social media app in this country, effectively under the control of the Chinese government. That's not disparaging TikTok. That's just a reality that TikTok is owned by ByteDance. ByteDance is a Chinese company. Any Chinese company is obligated to do the bidding of the Chinese government. This is not the U.S. free enterprise system that we have. They are obligated by law to advance China's interests there. So this is really a unique situation. I remember after Russia invaded Ukraine, one of the things that happened was the Russian propaganda station RT was still on a lot of cable channels here in the U.S. and in Europe, and a lot of people said, "Huh, that's weird. Why on earth are we allowing a Russian propaganda channel on American television? That's bizarre." And it wasn't broadcast, it was cable, so it wasn't really under the control of the FCC. But through, frankly, private pressure, in a matter of days, RT closed up shop because essentially American cable systems ditched them. And when I look back on this, it just seems odd to me that for years we allowed the Russian government to have a propaganda network on our TV systems. I feel the same way about TikTok. I think it's a more effective version, but it is ultimately serving the information interests of the Chinese government. And to me, the biggest tell about that is the strength of the resistance of the Chinese government to selling the app. If TikTok were some harmless video app, then the Chinese government would have allowed it to be sold, no problem. The fact that they have resisted, and just to be clear, that the reason why the app has not been sold is because the Chinese government does not want it to be sold. They view that as a face-losing initiative. They are the blockers here, right? ByteDance itself doesn't really have freedom to make that decision. But the fact that the Chinese government is restricting it from being sold really is all the evidence you need that China views TikTok as a national security propaganda asset, right? If they didn't, they would have allowed it to be sold. That's the rational thing to do. It would be hailed as a wonderful example of Chinese entrepreneurship and leadership, that the most successful Chinese app ever sold at a record price. But that's not what's going to happen. And instead, I think that this will go into effect primarily because that's what the Chinese government wants. There was a path here. I think Kareem mentioned Grindr. That is the path that was available, which is Grindr had fallen under ownership by a Chinese company. Late in the Trump administration, it went through review by CFIUS, and CFIUS said effectively, or we believe that Grindr had to be sold. Now, the interesting thing about CFIUS is the way that CFIUS works is they optimize, frankly, for face saving. So CFIUS never came out with the Grindr case and said, issued a press release or anything like that. There was a news report at the time based on not government sources that they had demanded a divestiture, and then a year later, it was announced that Grindr had been sold to a U.S. owner. But it's reasonable to expect that CFIUS did not want to allow that because of the same concerns, right? Which is that if the Chinese government, if Grindr had remained under Chinese control, then the Chinese government would essentially have direct access to sensitive information, HIV status, sexual orientation, potential blackmail material on a lot of Grindr users. And this was not a big deal. the Chinese government let this be sold to an American company, an owner. But Grindr, of course, is a much smaller app. And this was done through the normal CFIUS process. And so China didn't lose face. TikTok is, of course, orders of magnitude more popular than Grindr. And so this was never going to be done quietly. But, I think the important thing to say here is like the reason why this app is probably going to go dark in the US on Sunday is because the Chinese government wants it to go dark. And that's it, right? And so, if they wanted it to be sold, they would have allowed it to be sold. They have made no effort since this law was passed last year to pursue a buyer. That tells you, in my view, everything you need to know. There are I will say there are many, many people who I often agree with in tech policy circles who have been concerned about the First Amendment concerns. I respect their view tremendously. We agree on a lot of other issues. This is not one where I agree. I don't think anyone's First Amendment rights have been abridged here. As expected, TikTok goes dark on Sunday, I expect that creators will shift their videos to Instagram Reels, to YouTube Shorts, maybe other services that emerge, and they'll continue to have plenty of access to express themselves and find an audience. Last point, some people are, well, isn't this sort of like creating a situation where China is going to punish us? Look, they're already treating our companies unfairly. China does not allow YouTube, Facebook, Google on any of its services, right? And so there's already an unfairness that started with China's treatment of our apps. So there's an argument here that that we're doing to them what they have done to us for a long time. That's not the driver of this, but I think that is just the reality.
Well, thank you, Adam. And again, great. It's kind of like Nora was alluding earlier. I didn't necessarily know where everyone would. And so, yeah, we do have a kind of 2-to-2 panel here, and let's dive into it. The first question that I think just absolutely must be asked is, where is Trump on this issue, and how the heck do we know where he is on this issue, right? I mean, like that's just kind of the big question out there. Who wants to take that one on?
I'd be happy to get a stab at it since I'm like pretty free to say what I want as an academic. I suspect that Trump administration would probably like to see Project Texas go through because it fits their agenda of trade protectionism and reshoring. So if you keep TikTok while at the same time providing a data security environment where that would appease the intelligence community's concerns, I think it would be a win-win for the Trump administration. He wouldn't be angering 170 million people, and at the same time, he would be doing right by all these concerns.
And I mean, again, I want to hear other people too, but wasn't this originally? I mean, can't we really credit or blame Project Texas on Trump's efforts in 2020 to ban TikTok? Right, that was a response to that, as you laid out, didn't you, Kareem?
Yeah, exactly. But when it was rejected was during the Biden administration, so we still don't know how the Trump administration would handle that.
Yeah. Who else has insight on it?
Yeah, look, Trump is transactional. He governs from ego, not ideology. And so, he flip-flopped on TikTok a year ago when one of his significant bundlers, Jeff Yass, Susquehanna Investments, who's a major U.S. investor in TikTok, made investments in his campaign. Trump flip-flopped after that happened. And more recently, post-election, TikTok CEO went to Mar-a-Lago and told Trump how well his campaign content did on TikTok during the campaign. That's like music to Trump's ears, right? And so, Trump flip-flopped. He's transactional on this. I think interestingly, if Trump wanted to orchestrate a sale, he could make that happen. He could go to Chinese government and say, hey, let's get this thing sold. I don't know how invested he is. Also, this is very interesting timing, not of anybody's design, or not of design, but it's going to happen the day before his inauguration. Does he really want his inauguration to be clouded by this story? I think probably not. He submitted a comically kind of absurd amicus brief to the Supreme Court that basically said, I alone can fix this, which has no legal bearing whatsoever. So I don't think he has much of a plan. Now, having said that, Pam Bondi is the Attorney General nominee, having her confirmation hearing today, and she was asked just a couple minutes ago whether she would enforce the TikTok law, and she did refuse to commit to that. So there's some speculation that Trump could come out and say, well, I'm not going to enforce this law. I don't think that's much comfort at all. I don't think that's really meaningful. Apple and Google and the app stores and the US hosting like Oracle, they're subject to like $5,000 per a day per user fines if they did this, just because Trump, provided them a verbal assurance. I don't see them taking that to the bank at all. I think they'd still implement it.
So they would take it would be gone on the day of the 19th, the 20th. You'd not be able to re-download the app. Presumably you'd still be able to use the app on the 20th and 21st.
Well, okay, so the thing that's clear is the app stores cannot provide it as of the 19th. What's been less clear is whether Oracle, as its US data service, can host it. I don't think they can. There's been many people who thought, well, maybe they shift their hosting for existing users to non-US services. But the information has a piece this morning reporting that TikTok is very likely to just shut off access completely. And I think partly because my own view is that helps their domestic propaganda purposes in China more cleanly. If they're providing continued access through like non-US servers, it kind of is less of a clean story. And I think they want to be able to tell the Chinese people this was an experience of the US government being mean to Chinese companies.
Well, absolutely. And Nora, I want to hear what you have to say, but to me, this would be an argument. They would say, look, they're no better than us, right? They ban apps the way we ban apps. I mean, they won't say it that way, right? But that would be the resonance and the truth behind that app. So Nora, I don't know if I've stolen your.
Yeah, no, you haven't stolen any of it. I mean, this is when it gets really fun. So from a logistics, just implementation perspective, I actually think that, users may go on using TikTok after the 19th until it essentially becomes clunky and then eventually unusable, because there won't be updates to the app. The way you go on your phone and you update apps and the little bugs are fixed here and there, making it easier. When the app stores can't feature and host, those apps for download, you can survive for how long? Like a week, and then it's okay. Maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month. I don't actually know. I'm a lawyer. I'm not an engineer or programmer. So you get to the point where it just becomes unusable. But we've seen, frankly, from the Missouri law, excuse me, from the Montana law, that there are efforts, tech and hacker folks can easily download this. And so I think there's just the logistics question. There's also the cultural question here. And we've seen in the last few days, as the issue of national security usurping free speech comes out, a lot of Americans are downloading RedNote, which is another Chinese app. And they're using that, the joke being, I very happily will give the Chinese government my social security number because, rampant data privacy failures exist everywhere. And so there's a kind of activism here, cultural and digital activism, that has been igniting the conversation that, around that tension of national security versus free speech. The last thing I'll say is on Trump. And, what do we know about Trump? Well, he's erratic. He also has his own track record of being deeply violative of the First Amendment. He's a kind of anti-free speech champion, masking himself, as an excellent businessman. So those things together suggest to me that he may very well want to broker some kind of deal. But we're also in the middle of this corporate political friendly environment in which many social media executives themselves are beginning to curry favor with a political majority, trying to, come into the good graces of Trump and his incoming administration. So I think we're in this very weird environment where people like Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, they're giving tremendous amounts of money to the inauguration. They're making statements like we saw last week from Zuckerberg that he wants to discontinue biased fact checking. There's a kind of broader assault on what real free speech and First Amendment protections mean. And so this kind of deal, if Trump were able to, I think would represent a new and for him fantastic, win, a kind of victory lap, that he's the one that comes in from his Truth Social, from his actions previously, that he could very well save the day. And anytime he gets to claim that, he loves it. So the combination makes it for an odd mix of flavors, and we'll see.
Absolutely. Tony, and then Kareem, please dive
in.
In.
Thank you. Just to thicken the plot even more, it's been reported that Elon Musk is a potential buyer of TikTok. And also there was another report about Frank McCourt, former owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers. And the number floated there was 20 billion. That did sound low, but on the other hand, I don't know how many of us are privy to the financials. A lot of these companies really don't make money. You know, they're being bought and sold on the promise of making money at some point. So it's really hard to tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard the rumor / reports of Elon Musk. I mean, wow. I mean, overpaying 45 billion for X, or at least allegedly overpaying, and that's why I think 20 billion just sounds shockingly low. But let's hear what Kareem has to say. What are your thoughts on this?
Well,
Where Trump is?
Yeah, well, I made my comments on Trump. I was hoping to comment a little bit more on some of the operational challenges that come with what happens next. So, there's one thing that we need to keep in mind is that this is a global network, which is TikTok. So, when you create a video, you can set in your preferences if followers in your feed will see it or not. So that creates metadata that has to be shared across the network. So whoever the presumptive buyer is will have to contend with a broken network. So that means it's going to have a lot of problems in making sure these videos are interoperable between different markets. So that's going to definitely affect the sales price. And another point that occurred to me is that in Epic versus Apple, there was a big issue on the iOS store. And I think what Epic ended up doing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but you can get updates from their website directly. So I'm wondering if couldn't TikTok just do that abroad somewhere outside US jurisdiction? I mean, maybe the US will go after those companies after, but that's one possibility. I mean, we're also encouraging sideloading here, which is really bad for security. Maybe Tony would be able to comment on some of that, but I was also, yeah.
So many good issues. Let me bring in our Q&A because we've got a lot of great ones here. And I want to get Jim Mercanti's question about what are the panel's perspective on the misinformation aspect from TikTok versus similar misinformation messaging by US media. So I don't know, do any of you have thoughts on quote unquote misinformation by TikTok versus Twitter, X, Facebook, Meta, etc.? Who wants to take that on?
I'm happy to. My work deals, as some may know, with misinformation across platforms. I think it's a great question, and the truth is manipulation is now ubiquitous. You name it. There's a social media platform. There are other forms of manipulation in our information environment. That phenomenon is not exclusive to TikTok. And there was a passage from the ruling at the DC appellate level that I just want to name because it really, to me, spotlights some of the concerns here. The court said that content on the platform could, in principle, remain unchanged after divestiture. That's after sale. And people in the United States would remain free to read and share as much People's Republic of China propaganda or any other content as they desire on TikTok or any other platform of their choosing. And there's sort of this recognition in two ways. One, that disinformation, misinformation, however you refer to this, the creation, the proliferation, and the demand for by users of content that may or may not be verified, that exists across platforms. We've seen the erosion of trust and safety at a platform like Twitter. When Musk purchased that, he did away with trust and safety teams, policies, misinformation policies, political ad guardrails to create a more toxic environment that featured violent and false content. And we've seen that type of platform, when stripped of integrated integrity and safety measures, ultimately buckles under pressure. And so I think that there's just in the middle of this question, the assumption that perhaps, and I could be reading wrong, but that perhaps misinformation itself could be solved if a US company or entity owns TikTok. And I don't think that that's really accurate. Manipulation is everywhere. And what that ultimately means is that there are much broader systemic solutions we must examine, particularly ones that then don't remove options for people to get information.
But the trend seems to be going in the other direction, Nora, isn't it? And this is really hard.
It is.
As a
That could be its
technologist,
own
I'm
panel.
chomping at the bit, but
Yeah.
for at least technology solutions, we're developing wonderful, AI technology that can be put to use in this. It's put to use in a lot of other ways that we don't want, but this is one where at least it could help us. But we're just not. We're going the opposite way, which is really troubling.
We are, following the 2016 election, I think people became aware that social media could be a vehicle to spread misinformation. And so there was this accountability waxing. And now I think we're in an anti-accountability era. And TikTok here, the question of banning an entire platform fits within that. And I think is ultimately a distraction from exactly, Tony, what you're saying, that there are broader problems with an environment that is predicated on gathering our data to micro-target us with information we very well could feel is evocative and speaks to our necessarily crafted, beliefs and behaviors.
Are any of the panelists users of TikTok? Yes. Okay. No.
No.
All right. So two raised their hand. I don't know if Adam, you're gonna answer that one.
I'm on there periodically. I mean, it's a great service. The thing is, I think it's really important to say. People like me are concerned. I'm not anti-TikTok. I'm anti-Chinese ownership of TikTok.
Okay.
But how does the country of origin really dictate a security level for an application? This is what I really struggle.
Oh, that's easy. I mean, the Chinese government, you cannot do business in China unless you are advancing the country's interests. One of the things that TikTok executives like to say when they've been called in testimony is, we've never received a lawful order from the Chinese government for a user data. Well, that's not the way it works in China. China doesn't come with a court order. There aren't court orders in China. The company is integrated into the government. And if you do not give essentially a direct pipeline of information, a backdoor to the government, you can't operate. That's the way.
Are you referring to the golden shares arrangement that the government imposes on their private companies and SMEs?
And that's certainly part of it. The reality though is that you just cannot be a Chinese company. I mean, and the other thing too is that there was a time when the Chinese government was allowing its homegrown technology companies to grow bigger and successful, and they viewed that as a positive. I mean, but then they decided to strike back against that, and I think President Xi, essentially, they've now constrained really significantly any private companies that do well in China, and I think that's a reaction to not wanting to have alternative power centers. So
they flip-flop a lot. Yeah, but they flip-flop a lot. Between openness and cracking down on big tech. But there's one thing I'm going to have to disagree with you on, Adam, which is early on in TikTok's history, they were really butting heads with the government. There's a great Washington Post or either, I think, New York Times article that details the story of this is really just Chinese tech entrepreneurs. And they weren't really promoted. Even Huawei, if you go back to the history, they were really surprised how much they were able to gain traction in foreign markets. Eventually, I think by our own choices, but US policy choices, we were forced into this game of weaponizing the tech environment as a new battleground for competition. And perhaps this is what we should really be talking about. I mean, this is not a conversation about whether the CCP is watching our dance moves. This is a conversation about US-China competition and how we should be conducting that. And it's the unfortunate reality that this competition is being waged in the tech environment where the US has a great advantage. I mean, our tech companies are going to be hit abroad if we go through with this ban. Wouldn't you guys agree?
They're already been hit. I mean, YouTube, Meta, Google, none of these services have ever been able to, really been able to operate in China.
No.
What more could they do to us?
Well, they actually exited of their own, I think, choice.
Google exited, but YouTube and Meta's never been available.
Yeah.
Microsoft is in China. Apple is in China. The Tesla is in China. I mean, there's a lot of companies.
But those services they're not content services, right? There's a difference here, right?
Okay. So this is great. I mean, the whole distinction between data security and content, I feel like gets muddled a lot. And maybe we should get into some of the specifics here. I mean, is it the case that this covert content manipulation is so secret that we can't detect it, yet somehow it's so influential that it threatens national security? Like, how does that happen? And can someone please explain how do we get from a data security problem to content manipulation? Like, how does that specifically happen? I think we need to unpack some of that.
Tony or
Yeah.
Adam, you want to
Well,
address that?
I mean, I view them as two issues, and in my introduction, I pointed out that they're conflated, but you know, there's a harvesting of data that the Chinese. I mean, you know, we're an open society in the United States, so it's really been it's a feast of data for the Chinese government. That's their MO. So, you know, great for them, bad for us. And then the second issue is how they've chosen to manipulate the feed. I prefer to view them as separate issues. Others may view it differently.
Let's just take the second one for a moment, because that seems to be the one that's gotten a lot of attention. And I think, you know, Karim is making an excellent case that it's smoke and mirrors, right? I mean, the content side, not necessarily the data. I mean, like, let's take them one at a time. So where is the influence campaign of TikTok, right? Adam, you want to tackle that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, to me, it's not even necessarily what they've done, but what they can do and could do, right? And so and to me, I just think about the RT example. This to me is just a bright line. Like, we should have never allowed RT to have a government propaganda network in the US. We would have never allowed to have, you know, the Soviet Union to run a television station during the Cold War. And we shouldn't allow a company that's under the control of the Chinese government have one of our most popular social networks. That's just, to me, the line.
Nora, I'm presuming you disagree with that, and there's certainly precedent for allowing Communist Party papers in the United States. You know, radio station Cold War. I mean, you're using kind of like the radio station brings in all the public interest, convenience, and necessity case law that still exists, even if it's kind of outdated. The Red Lion arguments, so to speak. But I mean, like, Nora, do you agree with this point, or do you think we should kind of have a higher standard where we even allow our quote unquote enemies to have political perspectives and views in the United States under the First Amendment?
Well, I think there could be a Supreme Court ruling that comes down in the next few days saying that the Chinese government doesn't have First Amendment rights, and thus, you know, the ban would be upheld. There are any number of ways. If we wanted to get into a legal scenario planning, we could talk through that. But I agree with Karim's question, and I think it's one of the most essential, which is there is presumably such a widespread covert manipulation campaign, but one that we don't have evidence of. And I am not at the highest levels of top, you know, security clearance briefings on some of these, but I have not seen, and I know others who have not seen, evidence that would suggest rampant manipulation.
Right.
I hear Adam's point, the risk that there could be this. However, I've also seen firsthand from my own meetings with TikTok officials and with, you know, executives, the kind of guardrails they put in place. And so I think we have to consider the user First Amendment rights while we also look at the mechanics and just the practicality of what TikTok US is the company. TikTok US has a number of guardrails in place to make sure that data that is collected is stored in the United States. The company here that's headquartered, that employs people in the United States, has actually performed better when it comes to content moderation than any of the other platforms I've ever analyzed. Major ones like Meta, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Google. And so there are just a number of competing questions. And frankly, I come back to Karim's and that we really have not seen the evidence. The kinds of briefings that, you know, were rumored to exist and that ultimately spawned this legislation that then became law, many continue to question, was there really a there?
I want to get Shaikh Ferdhouse's question. If a TikTok ban were implemented, how might it set a precedent for regulating other social media platforms or technology companies in the US in general? what safeguards should be put in place to balance national security with freedom of expression. And again, kind of just did into this. I'm not saying we're becoming like China, because, you know, even if the Supreme Court did take this view, clearly we're not. We have First Amendment, they don't, et cetera, et cetera. But isn't there a concern that there's a lot of pre-censorship going on right now, right? Isn't there a concern that you know, the power that Elon Musk, as both a incredibly wealthy individual and someone who appears to have the ear of Donald Trump, does that pose some First Amendment democratic risks in the United States? I'd love everyone's thought on this question, if you have anything you want to weigh in.
I guess I could speak a little bit about the precedent that sets, and I think it will just be open season on all forms of global digital connectivity being labeled as national security threats. I mean, there's not a single nation that trusts another in the world. This is where we live in an anarchic system, and the practice of digital sovereignty, which is where we only trust the services locally developed and we don't engage in free trade with other countries, that's going to be the norm, especially if the US backtracks on this. I mean, this is going to be bad news for our companies. So I think this is the most important precedent that we need to be concerned with.
Tony, what's your perspective on that?
Well, I wanted to include that I'm very interested in the regulation outlook, because I think that's part of the equation. I thought that we were starting to make strides toward some sort of regulation, at least in the United States. I agree. You know, the internet really doesn't respect boundaries, and regulations, it's very hard for regulations to keep up with the technology and the way people use the technology. I'm not sure about whether, and I'm talking about privacy regulations. I'm also talking about AI regulations. I do feel that we need to have guardrails. And I'm not sure what kind of appetite there is going to be in the upcoming administration for those guardrails. So it's kind of open season. Some people may view that as good. I am really concerned about what's going to happen, especially, you know, with my background in security. I'm not very optimistic.
We'll give
I think there are two considerations here, Drew. The legal and sort of democracy one for the United States. And absolutely, we feel at Free Press, and I feel that banning TikTok sets a very dangerous precedent, and it could pave the way for future government interventions against online speech. I think there's a cultural component, and that's my other sort of conclusion here, which is, if what we're really doing here is opening the door to the wealthiest people being able to spend their days brokering for a platform that we've seen Elon Musk or others be able to then manipulate at their own personal will, this creates a new kind of billionaires versus the people era. And that's actually my biggest concern, because this democracy in the United States was founded on the premise that people can have access to ideas, can live with a sense of agency and empowerment. Our tradition of the ideals of free expression are ultimately betrayed if what's really happening are backroom deals when people say, I kind of want to manipulate things over here in this way. And so there's the legal, there's the cultural considerations, all of it is playing out. And over the coming days, it will be, I think a lot will unfold to add new wrinkles, new tensions. If in some way the Supreme Court punts and we learn that there is some kind of delay that would allow for Trump to step in, each of these bring with them new nuance and new concerns, all of them undergirding the concerns that I voiced before around our First Amendment being weakened.
We're going to give everyone a chance to offer quick final thoughts. Privacy is an issue we didn't talk much about. Clearly, very important. Clearly, maybe the looming or the secret issue driving this, and well worth talking about in its own right, as well as in this context. Let's just go in the same order we started in. Okay, Kareem, 30 seconds. Close out. What do you think the Supreme Court should do? Let's maybe ask that way, with whatever other quick comments you want to make.
I think it should punt in the issue for now to give a little bit more time to consider less restrictive means. Some great proposals were made because of this controversy. I think Representative Pallone suggested a data broker law. There's a lot of, risk disclosure, a law that just doesn't allow or creates consequences for sharing data with foreign adversaries. There's a lot of less restrictive means that the government hasn't really tackled or debated, and we should be considering that.
Thank you for being here and for your thoughts. Tony.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's depressing to think that there's an enormous cottage industry of selling private data, buying and selling private data. The Chinese government, frankly, could just go out and buy the data. They probably are. And so, that really points to the need for attempting. We have to try to regulate and defend ourselves. So that's one thing. I favor the TikTok ban because I think it really puts the issue, it continues to put these issues on the forefront. Something's going to happen. New platforms will come up. This platform will be sold. This too shall pass. Where it leads to, I'm not sure.
All right. Thank you again. Nora, again, great observations and thoughts. What are your closing thoughts? How should the Supreme Court handle that?
Well, I think the Supreme Court should correct the DC Circuit Court's ruling and clarify a few different points here, namely that banning a platform wholesale is violative of users and others' First Amendment rights. That's simple. And I think at the end of the day, the question we have before us is how do we go up against large lobbying forces and others that seek to profit off of the extraction of our data? As Tony said, there is a massive industry here, and it's not just Chinese, it's other United States and domestic companies. We have data broker industries that are thriving by gathering and then selling our data to government in violation of our Fourth Amendment rights. The conversation and the legislative solution has to focus on protections at the digital civil rights level to affirm data privacy protections, to minimize what companies can collect about us. I don't know if we're going to get that conversation in the next 2 years, given the political realities, but that's where we should be headed. That's the kind of pressure, upward pressure, we should be providing as spokespeople.
And thank you for being with us. Adam, you get the last word. What are your thoughts on the Supreme Court's upcoming action?
Sure. I think the court should and will defer to Congress passing a law and Congress's judgment in requiring the divestiture. I think that the app will probably go dark on Sunday. And then I think it will be interesting because I don't see ByteDance seriously engaging in any kind of a divestiture or sale plans after that. But we'll see after that. I do think that this points out I'm not worried, to your other question, I'm not worried about the precedent for speech. To me, there's a lot of speech regulation that's come up for the court in the last 2 years. This is very clearly an ownership restriction in the vein of CFIUS and foreign ownership of laws that have been on the books for a long time. I do think that this whole episode has pointed out, frankly, the inadequacies of the CFIUS process, which is based largely on cooperation from the target seller or target company owner, foreign owner, and is based on kind of an implied enforcement by the administration, but which the Biden administration was actually not willing to carry out. So I think it sort of pointed out the weaknesses of the CFIUS regime.
I know I said this was the last word, but Nora just provided a very important point that TikTok has told employees everything will be business as usual after January 19th. So different stories about what's happening.
Did they put that out through the algorithm on their feed?
No, there's been news coverage that they've been telling employees that.
I know. Just kidding.
I love it.
Well, so much, so lively. Thank you so much. Don't miss next week when we're going to be talking about the CHIPS and Science Act and recapping the state of it. We're always here Wednesday, 12 noon Eastern time. Thank you so much to our panel, to Karim, to Nora, to Tony and Adam, and we'll see you next week.